Minister Edwin Tong.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I thank the members for their quick, short and sharp speeches. I'll try to make my answers equally short. Mr. Ng asked what were the mandatory requirements for the PI, the preliminary investigation. There are no mandatory steps in this, but it really depends on the particular circumstances of the death and the context in which it occurs and whether or not there are particular areas of concern that the coroner has, which would then drive the steps to be taken in the PI. Mr. Ng also asked about, I think Mr. Ng, Ms. Lim and Mr. Tan asked about the current process, whether there are safeguards, whether we're doing this because there is a manpower issue and driven entirely by this. First of all, I will remind members what I said at the outset, that we've been doing this for a couple of years now, since the Coroners Act came into force in 2010, using a variety of different steps, technology, video usage, RFID, QR coding, and I think I described the process in some detail earlier. And we looked at that, we looked at the records, we looked at the reliability of that system, and as I said just now, we found that as far as we could tell, there were no misidentification using this system. And this then gave us enough confidence to propose this suggestion. It is not to say that because of this, that there will be a flood of non-inspections or non-viewing of the bodies as a result of this. I think it just gives the coroner a discretion on a case-by-case basis, assessing the probative value of each of the different sources of identification, making an overall assessment and deciding whether or not it is sufficiently safe not to actually view the body. I don't think I will go into the specific steps again. I think members can take reference on what I had said earlier. Ms. Lim had asked about the exemption, Section 17A, and I think Ms. Lim, to paraphrase her, I think suggested that there might be circumstances where the request could be motivated by less noble reasons. Nefarious reasons, I think was the phrase that was used. I would like to assure Ms. Lim that if such a situation arises, then it would not obviously be in a public interest for us to accede to that request. If there are suspicious circumstances where surrounding a head of state or a foreign government minister's death in Singapore, then obviously it's not in our country's interest to give up on the investigation and to let the foreign state take over the investigations and, in fact, to completely remove the body from Singapore altogether. So I think that she should be reasonably assuaged. On the suggestion that there might be a quick handover, there are steps in Section 17A, subparagraph 2, which sets out the different checks that the minister will have regard to prior to issuing the certificate, and this includes looking at information from the forensic pathologist, even directing the forensic pathologist to investigate the apparent cause to have some degree of satisfaction, and also the minister may direct the police to provide any further assistance that a pathologist might require. So all of these steps to give us the assurance that the death has not occurred in nefarious or unusual circumstances and that enough sufficient public interest for us to accede to the request. Mr. Tan asked about the rationale of 17A. The point is this. I think there are circumstances where a foreign state may have a legitimate interest in the death and request that Singapore does not conduct our post-mortem examination. For example, the foreign state may wish to maintain the integrity of the body. I think Mr. Tan mentioned preserve the dignity, so that it may conduct its own post-mortem examination on its resident or citizen. On other occasions, the death may have taken place in Singapore, but the cause of death is really only tangentially connected to Singapore and is instead more closely connected with events and circumstances overseas. Mr. Tan asked whether it's motivated by any particular occasion. It's really a question of comity. as far as we can to try and accommodate in appropriate situations. The point here is, at this point in time, the Act does not allow any leeway whatsoever. What these amendments do is not to say that in all such requests they will be granted, but it creates the possibility of acceding to these requests when they come in. Mr. Pillay asked about the Criminal Law Temporary Provisions Act. I understand where Mr. Pillay is coming from when he says that why is there no similar requirement for the PP's consent in this case? Well, first of all, the PP's views, whether or not they are going to be conducting further investigations, its sense as to whether there's any impropriety which merits further review or investigation will all be taken into account. It's not the same framework as the CLTPA here, because in that situation we're dealing with consent to detain a person. Here is in relation to a request by a foreign party to not conduct the post-mortem here and to release the body to a foreign state. And of course, the whole gamut of matters that surround the public interest criteria, including whether or not the PP's view is that there should be a further investigation, will be taken into account. I would add that the Minister is very unlikely to reach a conclusion that it is in our public interest, where circumstances surrounding the death is either unknown, unclear, or it is not apparently the reason that set out, not apparently, through a disease or manifest cause, and where there might be a suspicion of foul play. Then in those situations, in assessing public interest, the Minister will obviously have to consider the PP's position as far as these considerations are concerned. Mr. Ng asked for a clarification of the circumstances in which the Minister's certificate might be revoked. When deciding whether to issue the certificate in the first place, prior to, in other words, before we have to get into a situation where we have to decide what happens when we revoke it, the question as to what's public interest, whether it's appropriate in this case, whether we should be granting the certificate, will be judiciously considered. And this minimizes the possibility of having to subsequently reconsider similar circumstances as far as possible. Obviously, there could be change in circumstances. There could be a scenario where the foreign state, for example, withdraws the request for the certificate, or that there is now some other material that is known now that was not available at that point in time. Obviously, these are matters which might arise. There is no time limit prescribed for the revocation, but obviously the Minister will have to consider the time elapsed that has gone by, the prejudice, if any, that may have been occurred as a result of the body's movement, and whether it is practical in the first place if the body had already gone back, had undertaken a foreign post-mortem examination, and it is not feasible to have that review done in Singapore thereafter. So all of these factors will be taken into account, but for flexibility purposes, there isn't a prescribed time frame in the framework of this bill for the revocation. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I think I've addressed all of the questions raised by members. I beg to move.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Coroners Amendment Bill.
Committee stage what day?
Now, sir, I beg to move that Parliament will immediately resolve itself into a committee on the bill.
The question is that Parliament will immediately resolve itself into a committee on the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question is that clauses 1 to 5 stand part of the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Bill to be reported.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I beg to report that the bill has been considered in committee and agreed to without amendment.
Third reading, what day?
Now, sir, I beg to move that the bill be now read a third time.
The question is that the bill be now read a third time. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Coroners Amendment Bill.
Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that at its rising today, Parliament do stand adjourned to a date to be fixed.
The question is that at its rising today, Parliament do stand adjourned to a date to be fixed. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
To the contrary say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I beg to move that Parliament do now adjourn.
The question is that Parliament do now adjourn.